Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Always Compete Seahawks podcast. Today, we are joined with a very special guest, Mr. Nathan Ernst from the Real Hawk Talk podcast. If you're a Seahawks fan and you listen to podcasts, you've definitely heard this podcast before. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And we're excited and we're ready to talk some football. We're gonna be doing a full-on off-season breakdown. And we're just going to talk about kind of overall off-season grades, what happened in the off-season, and what were our expectations going into this off-season, which is actually what we're going to start with. Obviously, the big headliner pre-free agency and pre-off-season was always kind of, well, Russell Wilson might want to be traded. That was kind of the narrative around the Seahawks, and Russell Wilson wants an offensive line. And obviously, I think we were all expecting, like, me and Mike did an episode pre-free agency, and we were like, restructure, get Corey Linsley, Russ will be happy, and everybody's gonna go to bed at night comfortably. And that did not happen. However, we did get an offensive lineman, but just what were your expectations kind of going into this offseason? Because we obviously expected the Seahawks to kind of go all out because Russell Wilson is in DEFCON 1, and we were expecting some big stuff, and maybe nothing big, but what were your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they would find a way to make one kind of big move, whether it was Linsley or Zeitler or, one of the offensive linemen, right? For all the reasons that you just mentioned, that they would try to make a point of getting one of those guys. And then I thought they would kind of do a lot of fringe stuff. And I was kind of with you, I thought they would probably, free up the money that they needed through a Russ restructure or something like that. They went a totally different way with it. I think John Schneider deserves a ton of credit for creativity, for, really nailing what Dunlap's market was going to be, and really nailing where that relationship with him stood. Obviously, that's something that could have really gone sideways, and Dunlap could have said, I'm not coming back no matter what. But they obviously had that in a really good spot. So I expected a splash move, probably on the offense, maybe a wide receiver, and then just fringe stuff. And instead, they really did a ton of stuff in a really unique way.
So you mentioned Carlos Dunlap and how we originally cut him, and thankfully we were able to bring him back. I think that's kind of been a theme of the Seahawks these past couple years in John Snyder's tenure, where he kind of has a value for a guy and he will not go over that value. We saw it last offseason with Clowney. Clowney wanted the big bucks. We weren't going to pay him. We didn't end up paying him. Turned out to be a very smart move. So we added a lot of guys for very cheap. Guys like Kerry Hyder. I think Gerald Everett was actually pretty cheap, Akilo Wheelerspoon. So do you think that it was better for us to do maybe quantity over quality, or would you have rather had us sign 2 or 3 kind of big names in free agency?
I was really happy with the way it went. And I think they got some big names, especially if you consider Dunlap, even though that was kind of a winding path to get there. Gabe Jackson, I think, is about as big a name as you could have hoped for. So I think that they got some of the splash moves, even if one of them was just bringing Dunlap back. And then they went and got a lot of the guys that were pretty interesting, right? Kello has an up and down career so far, but like the talent is pretty undeniable. Hyder has been a really productive role player, but he's going to be put in that position, right? He's not going to be asked to do too much. So he, rounds that out in a really nice way. So I think that they did it pretty perfectly, really. There's not a lot, I think, that you can look at that, that where you're left wanting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think overall, you mentioned John Schneider's creativity, and I think that we saw so much of the stuff like void years, which was really never used ever before this year. I can't remember in any situation where I would see Adam Schefter 2018 tweet that somebody got signed to a contract with 3 void years. John Schneider did that. He signed like people to 5-year deals with 3 of them being voids and 2 of them being like 2 years. I think that John really needs to be credited for something like he's never done, which is be creative. I kind of hate it, but never restructured anybody, and they still haven't restructured anybody. They've been a team like, oh, let's rush to extend Jamal Adams and clear up that $5 million in cap space. They've never been that kind of team. So it's interesting to see the Seahawks really be like, we're going to lean all in on these void years and really push for creativity and to clear cap room in a creative way for the first time that I can remember ever happening on this team with this front office. So, I mean, yeah, I'm very happy with this offseason, and we'll touch on that a little later. But now that we kind of have our expectations out of the way, let's hop into the actual free agency. Like you said, a lot of moves, more moves than we were used to. But if you had to pick one move, trade, signing that you just really like, what is it?
We've talked about it quite a bit already. I think it's Dunlap. I think I don't know how fans are really looking at that, but I think that is something that was really just masterful on John's part to, cut a player, but have managed the relationship, like I said, to the point where he didn't take it as a slight. He wasn't, you didn't burn any bridges. Accurately understand what that player's market was going to be, right? And then have an offer there ready for him that, when he kind of came around on what the market really was, it was the best one there, or at least something he was really comfortable with. And then to get that player back, that's just, that is kind of a masterclass. And a lot of opportunities to go wrong. I was pretty critical of it at first because I expected it to go wrong. And, I think they said, or I think it came out that, they were preparing for Aldon Smith as a backup plan to Dunlap. And ultimately they were able to get both. But had that gone wrong, and they did go with Smith as the backup plan, and now Smith has some legal troubles that we'll see how that all shakes out. They could have been in a really bad spot, but, probably fair share of luck there, but also he understood that situation really well. And, you get a player back at a lower price, you save money, and he's really good. That's pretty awesome. I think that's the coolest and most impactful move probably they made in free agency.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, sorry. I totally agree with you. I think that Carlos Dunlap move was absolutely masterful. I was like you, Nathan. When they cut him, I was really, really upset. I was like, this was the guy who sparked our whole defense last year. We had that turnaround in the second half of the year. I think it was largely contributed to Carlos Dunlap and the consistent pressure he had. Cutting him, I was really not in favor of, but to re-sign him for cheaper and then to be able to get a guy like, Kerry Hyder and or Aldon Smith was just something that I thought was just, it was chef's kiss. So you mentioned Carlos Dunlap was probably your favorite signing. Who was your favorite new addition to the Seahawks? Through a trade or through a free agency, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's got to be Gabe Jackson, right? I mean, he's the biggest name, but probably him over Everett, I think. Those are probably the next two. It'll be. I could easily flip on that by the end of the year, depending on how they use Everett and kind of what kind of impact he has. I mean, he is a real wild card in what he might bring to this offense. But I think just solidifying that line, which is something that we've been begging for a long time. They've been doing it. It's been getting better and better the last few years. They have a chance to put out a pretty good offensive line this year. So I think I'm going to go with that for now.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the consensus number one move for the Seahawks offseason. And I totally agree with you on Everett. Everett was the one person this free agency who I would have been kind of hurt if we didn't pick up as a incoming free agent. I thought that the stars just aligned too perfectly. We need a tight end. We got their former tight ends coach, and he had a backup role in LA that never really worked out, and he could stay in the same division. I mean, that just seemed like something that was too perfect not to happen. And I'm very happy that they ended up making it happen. I wish it would have been a multi-year deal because I think Everett is kind of that good. And there's a risk of him maybe breaking out and having like a 700, 600 yard year, and he goes out and gets 10 million next year. But you mentioned with the Dunlap point, you said our expectations were that he was going to go out and he was going to get picked up somewhere else. And that kind of brought me to overall, our expectations coming into this offseason were kind of like, oh, veteran players are going to be super valuable because, you know, in a weird year again, teams are going to be valuing experience and they're going to be valuing this veteran leadership. And that has not happened. It's been more like we're going to give this corner 15 million who's 25 years old instead of giving Richard Sherman 8 million because he's old. So like I found it really weird. Like KJ Wright has had little to no interest on the market despite having maybe his best season in his career. And that's so weird to me. I mean, KJ Wright is a valuable position, is at a valuable position and plays that position very, very well. And he's had no interest. And I mean, I don't know how you feel. I feel like every day this is a move that could be inching closer and closer to KJ Wright coming back. That's kind of how I'm feeling right now in my gut, because I feel like Pete talked about in the press conference, we've sat down with KJ. We've talked with him. We have an offer out. We've kept him off for the whole time. And the fact that they're keeping very close contact, I think is promising. I just want to hear how kind of you feel on that perspective.
I'm not as optimistic about KJ coming back for a couple of different reasons. I mean, I don't know how much Seattle wants him back, and that may not be smart on their part, right? But they do have Brooks now that they want to take a bigger role, and it's not like those two guys can't play together, right? I just don't know, you know, how much Seattle. I'm sure they want him back. I doubt that offer is very high for him right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think if you're KJ, you know, he can still play, like you said, last year, you know, if not the best, one of the best years of his career. And so, you know, do you really want to go somewhere where you're going to be de-emphasized, right? Or in the last few years of your career, if you're going to have to take a low amount of money, either maybe go somewhere where you feel like you can play and have an impact, right? So I just don't know that it'll work out. But obviously the relationship doesn't seem to be too strained or anything. So, you know, he may just come back to a place that he's comfortable.
Yeah, and you know, just a couple of other things on talking about KJ right here for a second. I think the other team that he was really rumored to be attracted towards was the Cowboys. And the Cowboys just drafted a linebacker. So now they've got, you know, three guys there. I really doubt that he goes to the Cowboys after they drafted Micah Parsons. So I think that kind of opens the door a little bit more. But I'm kind of feeling like you're feeling, where it's like I think they want to really put their emphasis towards developing Jordan Brooks. I don't know if he's going to be, I mean, he's going to be what, like 33, 34? I don't know.
32.
32?
This year.
Oh, a little bit younger than I thought, but I don't know if they want to necessarily focus on bringing him back when I think that there's bigger issues on the roster than, you know, linebacker. So that's kind of how we're feeling about KJ Wright. While we're on the subject of bringing guys back, Richard Sherman has been a common point of discussion. He's been kind of floating around the idea that he could potentially return to Seattle. Went on ESPN yesterday, talked about that he's definitely open to a return. Talked to Coach Carroll. You know, they still have that relationship. His family still lives in Seattle. So what would kind of be your reaction if Richard Sherman were to re-sign and come back home to Seattle?
I mean, Sherman is maybe my favorite player from this entire Carroll era. So, like, from that perspective, it'd be amazing to have him back, right? I don't know how much he really has left. And I know that, you know, hey, his game is never really predicated on speed, and you know, he still has played well, but I think he's becoming more and more limited. But I mean, there's got to be a huge open competition, really, for both spots. I know he had a really nice year last year, but like, he should be. I hope he has to earn his spot, right? Nothing should be given to DJ Reed at this point. And so you really have two spots that are up for grab. And even if Sherm can't win one of those, he's always been a great teammate, teacher, another coach out there. And so if he can still give you something, even if he can't start, and then he can help grow some of these guys that you've got, the younger guys now that are around, I think there's a lot of value in that. So I think it makes sense all around. It's another question, though, of like, is he going to be okay being a backup if he can't win out the spot? Just how much does he really feel like he deserves to be paid, and what is he willing to take? So all those kind of questions have to get sorted out. But I mean, if you're Seattle and you can pull it off, I think it's a great deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think corner is still kind of the main emphasis on this team at this point. Ethan Posick is getting a really bad rap, in my opinion. Is he a great center? No, he's not a great center. I'm not even going to say that he's an above average center. But for the deal that we got him at, which is a 1-year, $3 million deal, he's going to play at an average level when he's healthy for a very small contract, which is not a bad thing. I feel like people were kind of freaking out saying, well, Creed is on the board at 56. I don't know how we pass up on this guy.
That was me.
I don't know how we pass up on this guy. This is a guy who's supposed to go maybe late first round, early second round. This is the guy for us. When I'm seeing most analysts say, well, I mean, I don't think he's that different from what Posick gives you right now, which is an above average pass blocker and a solid below average run blocker. So what is your opinion kind of the Ethan Posick re-signing and even the passing on Creed Humphrey at 56?
I mean, I'm right with you on that. Like, people were like pounding the table that they go out and get what's his name, like Austin Blythe, or who's the Patriots center, David Andrews or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Man, it's all Spider-Man meme. It's like they're all just the same guy, right? And like, I get it that Seattle has not had, like, he's had a bumpy career here so far, and he was not stellar last year or anything, but he's fine. And he is not a significant downgrade, or those guys are not, a significant upgrade over what he's. So I think people are overreacting to having Posick there, especially when he is your worst player, right? If you had a line full of Posicks, then like you're going to have a problem, right? But playing between Lewis and Gabe Jackson, like that's going to help him a ton, right? Posick's just not a problem for this team. It's the NFL. You have a salary cap. You're not going to have stars at every position, and you're going to have some Posicks out there, and that's fine. As far as Creed goes, I only watched him a little bit. I kind of had that same impression that like this guy does not look meaningfully better to me than Posick. I mean, you never know how guys are going to grow and develop, and maybe he turns out to be a star. But my bet is that in 4 or 5 years, we're talking about him as a free agent, and we'll see if he gets a second contract. I don't think it's any kind of guarantee. I think he'll end up, probably. I think a reasonable expectation is that he ends up in this kind of Posick range, right? Maybe he's more, maybe he's less. But he wasn't a guy that absolutely wowed me like he did.
So I think you make a good point, right? Talking about this year, is Creed Humphrey going to be better than, Ethan? And I think that's kind of the philosophy that the Seahawks kind of went into the draft with. They only had 3 picks, not very many at all. So I think they wanted guys who could really come in and contribute day one and make the Seahawks better. They really went for the guys who could, start week 1, then the projects who could start in 2 to 3 years. So being in the second round, it was their first pick. They drafted Dwayne Eskridge. When they drafted Dwayne Eskridge, I at first was a little mad, but then I kind of was thinking about it. I said, you know what, wide receiver 3 is kind of a big need. I think he'll definitely be. I think he goes into camp and he's the 3rd wide receiver behind DK and Tyler for sure. They're gonna get He's gonna get meaningful snaps. What was kind of your reaction when we took Dwayne Eskridge at 56?
I was surprised. I had watched, the receivers were the group that I watched the most of, and there was a couple guys that I really liked, or that I was interested in more than Eskridge, and so on the one hand, I was like, man, I've been wanting to take a wide receiver this whole time. I'm so happy that they took a wide receiver finally. This is awesome. On the other hand, this dude wasn't my draft crush. So, like, what are you doing, Seahawks, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, mostly just really happy that they took a wide receiver. I think one of the things that'll be really interesting to see is how he compares. You know, Elijah Moore ended up going just way too high for them, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But you have like a set of these receivers that are all the same guy, basically the same type of guy, right? From Moore to Rondell Moore, right? And then Tutu Atwell after them.
Anthony Schwartz too.
Yep, Schwartz, sure. I wasn't as big on him, but same idea, right? Type of player. So it's going to be really interesting to see, like, Seattle didn't get their top pick, right? So they kind of picked from the middle of the bunch here, which I don't exactly love, right? I think, who's the LSU guy? Terrace Marshall, right?
Yeah,
maybe
Marshall.
a little bit more of a unique type. You know, maybe you're picking higher from that type of receiver than you were from the type of receiver Eskridge is. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. The Atwell and Eskridge comparisons are going to be fascinating for the next 4 years.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I think the main, like, I think we were all kind of in the same boat here. Like, the day after the Seahawks picked Eskridge, I think Evan tweeted like, "Okay, I've officially talked myself into the Eskridge pick." I feel like that's kind of how we all felt. So like, I even had to do that, and I was like, "Okay, what are the 3 knocks on this guy? He doesn't have a full route tree, the level of competition, and his age. Those are the 3 knocks." So I'm like, okay, first off, the route tree. I mean, it's teachable and likely grow. It's a slot receiver. He doesn't need to have as many routes as maybe an outside receiver would, like DK. And like, okay, that's not a huge issue. It's okay. The level of competition, I was like, okay, he played in the MAC. That's a Division I, loose Division I conference. It's a loose Division I conference. So I was like, that's pretty concerning if you want him to be a day one starter on your lineup. But then I looked at his stats. I'm like, this guy wasn't just in the MAC. He dominated in the MAC. Like, it was like Madden stats in the MAC. He had a game against Central Michigan where he had 4 catches and averaged 53 yards a catch. Like, this is not like a guy who went to the MAC and had like 70 yards a game. This is a guy who went to the MAC and had like 175 yards a game. This guy balled out. So I'm like, oh, okay. That's okay. He dominated in the MAC. It's not like he was good. He dominated. My third point, which is my most concerning, is the age. He's 24 years old, which is older than DK Metcalf. That is older than DK. So I'm sitting here and I'm like,
Adams, right?
I think Jamal Adams is younger too. I think Jamal is.
Yeah.
I think Jamal is 24. I think Jamal is 24 as well. So
they're like right about the same age. So yeah.
Wow. I'm sitting here and I'm like, we drafted a receiver who's 24, who's older than a safety, who's been in the league for 3 years. So like, that baffled me. That's the one issue that I have, and it's the one issue that keeps coming up with Seahawks picks. Why do we pick old people? I don't know what it is. We have something against like developing these like 21, 22-year-olds. Instead, we're like, we want the guy who's going to bring us the most veteran impact coming out of college. We want the 26-year-old, 7th-year senior out of North Dakota State. Like, that's how we think. So what is your overall, opinion on just Eskridge as a player? Just take out everything on the board. What is your opinion on Eskridge as a player?
I think, just as a player, I think, like with the age stuff, right? It's easy to like, oh, this is the Seahawks, right? It's LJ Collier all over again. Like, no. Eskridge is extremely physically talented, right? He at least has that. He has that real strength that he can hang his hat on. That speed is going to work in the NFL. How well, what can he do with it? That all depends, right? We'll see what comes of it. Mm-hmm. But he's going to step out on the field and be one of the fastest players out there every game. right? And that is something that you're going to get. I like that he seems to fit really well too with Tyler and DK, right? He's a guy that can play inside, he can play outside and allow Tyler to play outside. If Tyler gets hurt or DK gets hurt, like obviously he's not just the freak that DK is, but he can stretch the field, right, and do some of that stuff that DK gives you. So he can kind of fill in for guys you have. He can play in some different spots and give you a little versatility. In rounds and with the ball in his hands, right? Stuff that Waldron likes to do. So just as a player, I think he's really interesting. Wasn't my favorite guy, but I think it's undeniable. Like you can definitely see what they want to get out of him, and it makes sense, and it should fit. And so I think all that stuff makes a lot of sense. For me, though, the age combined with the level of competition, right? It's not just that he's overaged, it's that he's overaged in the MAC. And so, yes, he did do everything you wanted him to do and dominate, but he did it as a 24-year-old against that level of competition. And that just makes the question mark even bigger.
Yeah. I'll just say this. I think, we're so obsessed with pre-draft. We're obsessed with like the mock drafts and who's this team going to take. I think the Seahawks are easily the hardest team to predict. I don't know if any of I think me and Sam did like 3 mock drafts. I don't think we got a single pick correct. It was pretty rough, and it's very, very hard to predict. And I think
it's hard to predict just because we don't like what they do.
Yeah.
We don't want them to be the way they are, right? Like we just said, they do this all the time. They draft the old ass dude who balled out at the Senior Bowl, right? Go look through Jim Nagy's tweets, and you'll get your short list of guys they're going to draft with their first pick. So I think it's less that they're hard to predict and more that we just hate what we predict them to do.
Yeah. I think that's so funny. He was talking about this right before he got on. He's like, we just pick the guys who just do the best at the Senior Bowl. Like that's just who we pick.
Yeah. Like I find it, I find it so funny. The Seahawks are the only team where I'll look at Seahawks mock drafts. Like CBS Sports had a mock draft where we picked Creed Humphrey. I sat there and instead of saying, "Oh no, he won't be available," I literally said, "No, we won't take him. We won't take him." We can't. So the Seahawks are just such a tough team to predict. I mean, moving on, Trey Brown, the corner, Oklahoma. I love his stats. He on paper and on per PFF, he was the best corner in college football according to Pro Football Focus. So the one issue that I have is his size, and I'm not a Pete Carroll guy. We need the 6'4" corner who has 88-inch arms. I'm fine with picking a guy who's shorter and maybe has shorter arms, but 5'9.5" as an outside corner is a little concerning. So what do you just think about that pick?
I mean, where did they pick him again? Was he 4th round?
Fourth.
Yeah, 4th. It's hard to get too picky at that point. I mean, the size is definitely a concern, but it seemed like they saw him as the best player out there, or at least the best cornerback, right? And so they dropped some of their other concerns and said, let's just get a really good player, right? Let's just get a guy that we believe in. And I like that, their formula has worked really well. And I think it's one that they should not be looking to deviate from, right? Or to completely drop and go away from. But, just like with the void years, right? Sometimes you have to be a little flexible and you have to do things that are a little different. And I think that's what the Trey Brown pick was. I think it's weird because he's older too. He's also 24. He played really well by all measurements. I think he's going to learn a ton, and there's going to be a ton that they clean up in his footwork and technique. And I think that even though he's older and all that, and you don't necessarily project as much growth and change out of him, I think that there's a lot that he's going to get out of the system and from these coaches to make him even better and to really grow his game by a significant amount if he can pick it up and learn it.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. And I think if there's one team, over the past 10 years that's done the best job of plucking those DBs late in the rounds, I think it's been the Seahawks. I mean, the Legion of Boom, Shaq Griffin was later than the first round pick. So I think they do a great job of picking those DBs late in the round and hopefully developing them to be very good. Moving on to our third draft pick, which was also our last draft pick because we just went to a trading frenzy this past year. Stone Forsythe, tackle out of Florida in the 6th round. They call him the Stone. There was that tweet, of course, of him and The Rock, which is just legendary. Fell in love with the pick as soon as I saw that tweet. So kind of what are your opinions on the pick and as Stone as a player?
I kind of love it. I don't get why he was available that late. So John's press conference, they asked him this like just straight up, and he was like, I don't really know. Maybe he just doesn't have the kind of attitude that offensive line coaches like. And I will never put it past NFL coaches to be extremely dumb like that. But I think maybe the bigger reason about why he dropped is because I don't think there's a ton of upside with him. He looks a little maxed out, but like he's very good, right? He may be maxed out, but that maxed out version of him is really good. So is he going to like replace Dwayne Brown and be, an all pro or a Pro Bowl left tackle? I would be surprised. Can he learn right tackle and be Brandon Shell? Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And where they got him, that's fantastic. That's amazing. So I don't know how great he's going to be, but it feels like he has a very high floor.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
I think that this is like the one pick that's been consensus good among most Seahawks fans and amongst the media. I mean, if you look at kind of like top 10 day 3 steals, Forsythe has been on most to all of them that I've seen. So I'm very much in favor of the Forsythe move. And so I was sitting on draft day. We picked Forsythe. I'm like, okay, no more picks. And I'm looking at, I'm like, damn, there's some good guys available. There's True Williams. There's Cade Johnson. These are guys who I liked. And I'm sitting there at 259 and I'm checking the board and I'm like, I don't think I heard about Cade Johnson getting picked. He did not get picked. And I'm like, we need to sign this guy right away. And John and Pete did their work. And Nathan, you and I, a little bit earlier in the draft process, kind of went into DMs. We were like, hey, we're talking a little bit of wide receivers. We kind of agreed that we mutually both like Cade Johnson a lot. So just how good is it to get a guy at his value as an undrafted free agent?
I mean, you could be talking about another like Doug Baldwin here. I mean, I don't want to that's not the expectation for him or anything, right? I think that it could be really, really huge. The easy comparison that everybody makes that watches him is Tyler Lockett. Not so much Doug, but Doug was the undrafted guy, obviously. And I don't think he has quite the athleticism that Tyler had, or Doug had for that matter. And that's probably why he ends up being a free agent. And so we'll have to see whether, making contested catches and doing some of the acrobatics against, the D2 schools, right, without having elite athleticism, that's one thing, right? Can you now do that in the pros? That's a big question. That's a big jump. But man, his tape is so much fun. He does remind me a lot of Lockett, the way he can stretch the field, go up and get balls, even though he's not big, right? He's not dependent on just getting behind a defender. He can win contested catches. And he's a pretty solid route runner. He can shake guys. His Senior Bowl one-on-ones were filthy. And those favor the receivers. So, you got to keep that in mind. But I think he is just a huge addition.
Yeah. So, this whole time we've been talking about, the free agency. We've been talking about the draft, the offseason. And you're as unbiased as you can be. Do you think the Seahawks got better in this offseason?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so I guess we should run through it. Like, who were the losses? KJ, right? And Quill.
Yeah.
And Jaron Reed.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Is that it?
David Moore.
Sure.
Jacob
we're talking about
Hollister.
losses.
Yeah, Jacob Hollister.
Talking about losses, not addition by subtraction. Yeah, so the cornerback spot will be one to see. Whether they really got better there. I personally don't think Jaron Reed was a huge loss. I think that they'll fill that just fine, especially with growth from Puna and Monet. I think Monet is probably still pretty underrated. I think he's actually real good. So yeah, I think undoubtedly they got better. I don't think there's much. Do you guys disagree? Do you think that they?
Oh, I totally agree. I just I'm a homer for the Seahawks. I always think they get better. So I just wanted to run it past an expert really quick. And I guess, I totally agree with you, right? We've got a lot of guys, I think, that can contribute right away. I think we've got a lot of new starters coming in. I think Jared Everett's going to start. I think Dwayne Eskridge will be wide receiver 3. I would almost guarantee Trey Brown gets a lot of reps at corner. Gabe Jackson's definitely going to start. Kerry Hyder is going to be a big part of the rotation. So totally agree with you that, we got some dudes to fill in, and we didn't lose too much. Shaq Griffin is probably our biggest loss, and he was a average corner, in my opinion. So knowing what we know now and discussing what we've discussed, again, try to be as unbiased as you can. What do you think the Seahawks record will be in the 2021 season?
They should win. They should win 12 games, right? They should be a better team than last year. They won a lot. And, maybe you get a full healthy year out of Jamal. Maybe Waldron can add to this offense. At the very least, you're not going to lose much on offense, you don't think? It feels like a team that could easily pick up another win, even though, going from 11 to 12 is a lot harder than 7 to 8 or whatever.
Yeah. So I just want to say, once again, thank you for coming on, man. Really, really appreciate it. Make sure to go check out the Real Hawk Talk podcast. It's always a great listen. Some entertaining guys over there. So thank you for coming on, and we'll catch you later.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Rob,
thank you.
Have a good one.